Hi, I'm Dr. George Yancey. Let's share some paradigms. Paradigm share today concerns change or die. Have you ever undergone a church split? I have. Let me tell you about the church split. So, the church I'm talking about was a church that was in transition. The church had been around for decades. It was in a college town. And as people were coming in, you had the old standbys. And then you had, at the time, I was a young buck. You had the younger people coming in, college, young families, all that sort of stuff. As you might imagine, while we believe the same things as far as theologically, we had different cultures. This was often reflected in the music, in our attitudes as to how we should deal with society. Those who are in the younger group, which I'll put myself in for the purpose of this discussion, we wanted more contemporary music. The older folks wanted hymns. Many of us were very supportive of the efforts to reach out to the kids of the community. We were a church that was in either multiracial or mostly black community, although most of the church were white. I was the exception. I wasn't the only one, but there were a lot more whites. Many of us were thinking, hey, this is a good thing. The church had a church school for that very purpose. Folks did not like that. At the time, I was a volunteer college minister. I wasn't getting paid any money, but because I was the college minister, I was allowed to go to the staff meetings. Our staff consisted of the head pastor, an education pastor, a music minister, a youth minister, all of them were paid, and then me, the free guy. But that was fine. I was doing it because, out of the ministry was needed. I love trying to serve people. I'll try to build something. So that's fine. But it did give me insight into what was happening. Well, what began to happen was some of the older folks began to withhold their tithe, their money to the church because they were upset at the way the music was being done and at the presence of the school. And so they wanted to see some change. And the way they did it was withholding their money. And from that, we could no longer afford the other 4 paying pastors. Now, the youth minister was hardly making squat. He's making a little bit more than me, which was 0. He wasn't making that much money. So his job was never in danger. But the church had a financial crisis where they had to let either the music minister or the education minister, who's in charge of the school, go. And we tried to vote on it. It was put before the congregation and said, hey, which one? The congregation did not want to let either one of them go. Many people in the congregation, you could not get a high enough vote. So they eventually had a vote where abstaining from letting either one of them go was no longer an option. They said, financially we just could not afford it. We'll let one of them go. And the vote was in, and it was the education minister. He was to get the axe. So that would effectively end our school. Well, this was well known. During the staff meetings, because they said a certain date, obviously, they didn't say, hey, you're gone, clear out your office. It wasn't anything like that. So a certain date. The Sunday before that date, they're going to have sort of a goodbye celebration, which, as you might well imagine, will be bittersweet to him. During the staff meeting, though, I found out that the music minister had seen the writing on the wall. So he had been secretly applying to other jobs, and he found one. And so the plan was that on that Sunday, it's going to be a Sunday evening, where we would have the celebration for the education minister, that the music minister would then say, will inform the congregation they found another job, he's moving on. So the church was not going to lose just one minister, but 2 ministers. I was not allowed to tell anyone. The head pastor maybe swore to secrecy not to tell anyone. So I told my roommates, who were also going to church at the time, look, guys, all of this is totally not of God's will. You will find out during that event just how much it's not in God's will. Because I knew what they're going to find out at that time was we're not just using our education minister, we're also losing our music minister. Okay, let me tell you a story. Before I do, if you like this sort of conversations and this sort of analysis, please give me a like, subscribe to this channel, get the word out. so we have more people who could see some of the issues that I talk about and hopefully have better discussions. So the night came, everyone was saying their goodbyes to the education minister. The music minister comes up. He says, I have an announcement. I have received a job offer at such and such a place, and in about 6 weeks, I'll be gone too. And my roommates were like, oh. Then the head pastor comes up, and he says, I too have found a job someplace else. And by this such and such time, I will be gone. I had no idea. My roommates later said, I don't think George knew that was happening from the look on my face. We had lost, from a staff of 4 paid people, we're down to, that's right, the youth minister, the guy who makes very little money. The church then did get a temporary pastor. Church never recovered. The young people fled. They were not wanted. They had all the hymns they wanted. They had no Christian school, but the church was dying. And predictably, a few years later, it sold the building to a prosperous Black Christian group. I heard a decade or so ago that the church was meeting in a house somewhere that's dwindling down so few people. I'm skeptical the church still exists. I'm not looked it up. It's not that important to me. It basically killed itself because it refused to change. And that's my main point. We have to adopt, not the core issues. I'm not talking about changing our deep theological beliefs, okay? But we have to adapt to new changes in our society. If we don't, we run the risk of dying. I remember talking to a minister when I was at a conference I was speaking at. It's on racial issues, and we're talking about what groups can adjust, which groups cannot, to our changing racial dynamics. And he had a really good illustration. He said there are certain people who are anchors. They anchor themselves and the church to a certain way of doing things, and they're unwilling to change. Now, sometimes the anchors are good because sometimes they remind us, hey, you don't want to constantly change. You don't want to change everything. And here's some good things to keep up. So they have a place. They have value. But when you have too many anchors, the church cannot change. And this is in the context of trying to bring more racial diversity when your community is becoming more diverse. The anchors refuse to change. You have to fight against the anchors to change. He said of a situation where there's a church that had this situation. They made the changes they needed to address, adapt, appeal to people of different races, and the anchors fled. And then they found another church where there were a lot of anchors, and they joined that church. Now that church had so many anchors that they could not change when they needed to. And what happened then happened in my old church. Everyone else fled. The anchors, who tend to be older folks, were there. And for a while, the church could do pretty well because they had some money. They were throwing some money at the church, but they began to die off. And the pastor there could do nothing but officiate funerals because that's where the church had gone to. Change is not some sort of absolute. It's not I'm an absolute good. Once again, there are times where we want to keep certain things the way they are, but we have to be thinking about change. We have to be introspective about what we need to do, how we need to change. The way things that worked 10 years ago will not work today, or will not work as effectively today. Being flexible, being reasonable, thinking about the sort of changes we need. That is a task for Christian ministries today. It's a task that I hope more of them take seriously. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please leave me a like, and please absolutely come back. We can shatter some more paradigms.